As fans of the NFL, we love the intense action that comes with watching this violent sport. Because of the NFL's popularity, the players of the game get rewarded with many riches and sometimes fame. Unfortunately, these players are at risk of suffering some serious life-altering injuries at the same time. So here's a list of all the NFL players in history that have been paralyzed from football. Darryl Stingley was a New England Patriots wide receiver from 1973 to 1977. In a 1978 preseason game against the Oakland Raiders on August 12th, Stingley was hit by Raiders defensive back Jack Tatum. As Stingley stretched for a pass, he and Tatum collided. Stingley's helmet made contact with Tatum's shoulder pad, compressing his spinal cord and breaking his 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae. He eventually regained limited movement in his right arm, but spent the rest of his life as a quadriplegic. The injury came just after Stingley had finished negotiating a contract extension that would have made him one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL. Instead, it was never signed. Although controversial, the hit was not against NFL rules at the time, as it was not helmet-to-helmet contact. No penalty was called on the play. Today, however, the NFL has banned all blows to the head or neck of a defenseless player and has disallowed players to launch themselves in tackling defenseless players. The incident became one of the first symbols of violence in football. Stingley reportedly described it as a freak accident, but resented Jack Tatum for not apologizing for the hit without cameras being involved. Stingley sadly died in 2007 as a result of heart disease and pneumonia complicated by quadriplegia. Mike Utley was a Detroit Lions offensive lineman from 1989 to 1991. In a 1991 game against the Los Angeles Rams on November 17th, Utley suffered a neck injury after falling headfirst on the artificial turf. During the play, he was blocking an opposing defender that jumped to try to block the Lions' touchdown pass. As the defender jumped, Utley fell forward and his head hit the ground first, which caused it to bend forward and then snap back on impact. This impact caused him to injure his 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae, rupture a disc, and damage his spinal cord ligaments, which left him paralyzed from the chest down. His extensive rehab began after several surgeries, and the year after the injury he started getting better movement in his arms and hands. 8 years after the injury, he regained some signals back in his legs and was able to walk with some help for the first time since suffering his injury. Originally a quadriplegic, at the age of 59, he has basically complete use of his upper extremities, making him a paraplegic. Utley now is the founder of the Mike Utley Foundation, which helps educate and finance rehabilitation for people with spinal cord injuries. Dennis Byrd was a New York Jets defensive lineman from 1989 to 1992. In a 1992 game against the Kansas City Chiefs on November 29th, Byrd suffered a neck injury after colliding with a teammate. During the play, he rushed in an attempt to sack the quarterback, who managed to step up in the pocket to avoid a sack. As a result, Byrd, who ducked his head before impact, collided with his Jets teammate Scott Mercerow's chest. The head-first collision broke his 5th cervical vertebrae and left him unable to walk. He was carted off the field and his uniform was cut off his body. He was partially paralyzed, but after 3 months of extensive rehab, he learned to walk again, but could no longer play football. The Jets retired his number 90 jersey in 2012, and a book as well as a made-for-TV movie were created about his story. Unfortunately, in 2016, Byrd was killed in a car accident by a teen driver at 50 years old. Reggie Brown was a Detroit Lions linebacker from 1996 to 1997. In a 1997 game against the New York Jets on December 21st, Brown suffered a neck injury after colliding with an opposing player. During the play, Brown was tackling a falling running back while the crown of his helmet simultaneously crashed into the back of a falling Jets lineman. He collapsed to the ground where he laid motionless for 17 minutes. He was unable to breathe during the time, causing him to go unconscious and having CPR performed on him to save his life. He was put on a stretcher to head to the hospital where for the next few hours he would fall in and out of consciousness. The next day, doctors performed emergency surgery that fused 2 of his vertebrae that had been displaced by his injury. The injury left him paralyzed, but after the surgeries, extensive rehab, and a special back brace, he no longer had to use a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Now, at 47 years old, he has full function of his extremities with some side effects, and can walk again. He and his wife now operate a charter school in Texas, and due to the seriousness of his injury, was never able to return to playing football. Kevin Everett was a Buffalo Bills tight end from 2005 to 2007. In a 2007 game against the Denver Broncos on September 9th, Everett suffered a neck injury when tackling the opposing team's kick returner. During the play, Everett was on kickoff coverage and tackled the Broncos kick returner Dominic Hickson at the 20-yard line, and unlike the other players in the area, did not get up off the ground and showed no movement. He was transported off the field by ambulance and spent 2 days under sedation and a respirator as doctors evaluated the severity of his injury. It was announced that he suffered a fracture and a dislocation of the third and fourth cervical vertebrae, which caused the spinal cord injury. Everett underwent emergency surgery where his vertebrae were repaired using bone grafts, a plate insertion, and 4 screws in his spinal column. Immediately after surgery, he couldn't feel anything below his shoulders, but after a few hours, he was able to wiggle his fingers and toes. 3 months later, after extensive rehab, he was able to somewhat walk again. In April 2008, he underwent more surgery to relieve persistent pain in his neck and continued rehabilitation to strengthen his body. Over a decade later, Everett's body is mostly back to normal, but he has never been able to return to football. Ryan Shazier was a Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker from 2014 to 2017. In a 2017 game against the Cincinnati Bengals on December 4th, Shazier suffered a severe back injury after tackling an opposing receiver. During the play, Shazier tackled receiver Josh Malone by launching the crown of his helmet into the receiver. As he fell down, he immediately grabbed his lower back and could not move his legs, calling to the sideline for medical attention. His back was stabilized on a stretcher, and then he was taken to the hospital, where it was revealed he suffered a spinal contusion. 3 days after the injury, Shazier underwent spinal stabilization surgery to secure the injured section of his spine and aid in his recovery. It took 5 months of extensive rehab to be able to walk again, and on September 2020, Shazier officially announced his retirement from the NFL. He was never able to get back to playing football, but as of recently, he started his own trucking company that transport vehicles across the country. So as you can see, when playing football, there is a risk of suffering serious life-threatening injuries. Would you allow someone you love to play this sport despite the risks? There's a lot of fun, wealth, and fame involved, but also risks for many types of injuries. Comment down below your thoughts and share this video with someone you know. Thanks for watching.